I'm Andy Schmuckler. I call this Why Democracy v. Fascism aligns well with good v. evil. And I'm just going to find out as I go along whether just what directions. There are a lot of rabbit holes here. Like people might balk at just the very idea of there being such a thing as good v. evil. And one of the things I claim is that I can show that there is a contention of forces at the center of the human drama that could be described as two coherent forces, one of which consistently works to make the human world better, and one of which consistently works to make the human worse, or one makes it more whole and one makes it more broken. And I claim that I can show the existence of there being such a force. So I also say that it's perfectly reasonable to call a force that is a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more broken. It's entirely reasonable to regard that as a force of evil because it behaves pretty much the way people have imagined there being such forces at work in the world, back in the religious framework. And I say that I can show it in a purely secular framework, that there is such a force. How much? But let me just say, rather than go down to the very philosophical roots where I can claim that I can show that the good is, or the moral dimension, is real, important, and life-serving. I claim I can do that. Go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org. But for the time being, let me just say, let's imagine that it can be established that human flourishing, human fulfillment, and other sentient creatures versus their being in some form of state of misery, pain, agony, suffering, whatever, that there is a distinction to be made that's real and important. And it's there because it's life-serving. I claim that I can prove all that, but the fact is, if human fulfillment is essentially, just to simplify, that the good lies in people having life that is a good thing for them, as opposed to, say, wishing they'd never been born, that terrible kind of a scenario. Glad to be alive, the positive element being there. The more positive, the better. The best human world would be a world in which people flourish, thrive, are fulfilled the most. And then you can also add in whatever other sets of values besides just us humans that need to be given proper weight. And I think there are plenty of them, but I don't have any particular insight into how to weigh things. I do want the planet to be healthy. That does seem like a sacred thing, and that's just how I feel about it. There's something about the system of life out of which we emerge, which created us, which has created this sort of incredible thing, both the biosphere, independently of us, and then this weird thing that because we've been this creature that unleashed disorder on the world with our civilization, we've sort of upset the apple cart. So what happens, I maintain that I can show, is that if a creature steps onto the path of civilization, it creates a new situation. Civilization, a new situation. That situation is inevitably generates a dynamic that is a function of the system. And the result of the dynamic is that civilization will inevitably evolve in certain directions that people would not have chosen, that the creature would not have chosen, but it's mandated by the systemic force. That's what I claim that in that book I chose. And as far as I can tell, it still holds water. But the result of the disorder and the rise of the spirit of the gangster, which is one way I talk about the force of evil, a force of brokenness, um, which occasionally manifests itself in some kind of a pure form. And one of the things I've maintained is that I've studied three fairly pure forms of a force of brokenness, and one of them's got to do with the force of the slave power as it played out in America. Well, let's just stop it at the outbreak of the Civil War, though there's no way it actually ends there. But from I don't know, the 1840s up until the outbreak of the Civil War, there was emerging a more and more powerful political force that was kind of a coherent force that was consistently working to make things more broken, and played a crucial role in that ultimate brokenness of the nightmare of the American Civil War, which we celebrate, but which is really, like the worst thing that could have happened to the country. I mean, it was a difficult problem to navigate, but it wasn't written in stone that we had to navigate it through that kind of a nightmare. But a force of brokenness took hold of the region of the South, formed Confederate States of the Union, seceded, fired on Fort Sumter, and we were off into an orgy of brokenness, a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. Well, it makes things worse if you look at what the Republican Party is, if you look at the direction in which things would move if the Republican Party got to win the battles. What you will find is, I feel very confident, you will find a world in which Americans' experience is much, much less fulfilling in a whole variety of ways than if the decision were to go instead to the force of democracy and allow what remains, I think, a majority of Americans who are not wanting to go down the path of fascism to register their will that the American democracy be preserved through the election of 2024. It's simply the case that the side that's against Trump would move our world in directions that enhance the quality of human life, as well as the viability for the long term of human civilization. There's not a whole lot of ambiguity left about which side is constructive and which is destructive. Democrat versus Republican was not aligned all that closely with good v evil. Conservatives represented their own version of the good, which had validity also in the age of Eisenhower, say. There was a mixture, but when you get to democracy versus fascism, when you get to Biden versus Trump, when you get to the Democratic Party as in terms of what it stands for in this current battle in America over our destiny, and the Republican Party as it has become a party of fascism that consistently supports lies and acts in ways that further the cause of lawlessness and move the country toward a authoritarian tyranny rather than the will of the people working as in the democratic system our founders gave us. And the America that we will flourish in is clearly going to be the one that's true to our democratic constitutional heritage and the rule of law. That those speeches I talked about just one video ago about uh, how to put it. The problem we have with America, the American judiciary, it can be combined with an understanding that the well-being of the American people depends upon preserving our heritage. That generations of Americans have had what by historical standards have been great blessings for all of our shortcomings and groups of people who have not gotten those blessings. Nonetheless, the people who came to our the teeming masses coming here to breathe free, did not come stupidly. When the French gave us the Statue of Liberty, they knew who they were giving it to. Because it turns out that if you can create a political order that works and that also respects the liberty of people and the right of the people to choose how power is going to go, rather than like in Putin's Russia, where they get his lies, they get sent to his wars. They have no real. They get to participate or stay home from bogus elections. It's all on his terms. And it can be shown that that's what's at stake in this election. Part of it's focusing on the battle between the Supreme Court and the rule of law. Part of it can be told in terms of the rule of law against Trump's crimes. But I think that the issue of the rule of law is fairly central to the overall drama, because that's at the key of allowing us to have a society where people are free to speak and to believe and to publish and to have the body politic be the place from which things that are thus free bubble up and all end up expressing themselves through free and fair elections, where the will of the people determines who gets the power. That's what the Trumpites clearly are jeopardizing. Not only with disenfranchising people, but the big lie, preparing for the next big lie. And we can see other preparations as well. Maybe all these things can be woven into a single campaign, where we help the American people understand that their good lies in the side of democracy. That has been the recipe for the most decent societies in the history since the first empires arose. They're not based, Denmark, Germany, Greece, they're not based on slave labor. There are no slaves building pharaohs to the rulers in these countries. They've got their problems, but they are places that have real politics that are grounded in allowing the will of the people to express itself about who's going to wield the power. This is what's at stake when you talk about democracy versus fascism. Fascism is not concerned about the well-being of the people. Is Putin looking out for the average American? I mean, average Russian? He hasn't minded sending tens of thousands of them into a meat grinder. He just maintains his power. He doesn't He doesn't focus. He focuses on building his empire. He doesn't focus on improving the lives of the people who live in the country he rules. And the same will be true of Trump. Our fascist leader already, when he was president and we had a pandemic, showed that we know from reliable testimony, the Homeland Security aide to Mike Pence, all he was concerned about is how to play this politically for his own advantage. He didn't show a whole lot of interest that any other president would have shown about how to protect the American people. The good of the people lies in preserving democracy. Donald Trump represents himself as consistently making the world more broken, including with all his lies that so many people somehow believe. Americans can be led to see that their good lies in supporting Biden, and that what the force of fascism represents in Trump and the Trump party and all the ways in which it has shown itself to be ugly, that is not the direction that people want to go. It is the course of evil to give the power to fascism. Trump winning would mean less response to climate change, probably undoing the response we already have. It would mean undoing the U.S. government as a place where the will of people get reliably are able to a meaningful degree at least, choose who's going to wield power on their behalf, and so on. You can go through the issues. Just want to underscore that the battle between at all these levels, democracy versus fascism, all the way down to Trump versus, Biden versus Trump, and all the way through to good versus evil, that these are all aligned with each other, that the larger battlefield here is, well, democracy versus fascism is, and then Trump versus Biden is one of the important showdowns. So it's like the midway of the war, but there's plenty of other war going on. Fascism owns the Supreme Court right now, for example, but and defeating Trump in 2024 isn't going to change that. At each level, we're best off to see it in terms of the larger picture, to know where to deploy our forces and what the connections are between what happens in this part of the battlefield and what happens in that part of the battlefield. Need a good map, and that's what I've been trying to provide. And it's a three-dimensional map in which there are different layers, in a sense. And democracy versus fascism is a version of a larger battle that's been going on in human civilization since we stepped onto the path of civilization. It's the battle between those forces that are trying to, the pursuit of happiness, those forces that come from within us where we try to get our experience to bring us happiness, to get us a sense of fulfillment, to get what we want. That's sort of built into us to do. But in the meanwhile, we're also having to live in a civilizational environment that's been largely selected by a social evolutionary process, a selection for the ways of power that sort of amounts to giving the spirit of the gangster a disproportionate say over how civilization develops. So it's been an inevitably difficult situation that we plunged ourselves into just because we were creative enough to be the first creatures on this planet to start inventing our own way of life. But that unleashes a certain kind of disorder, which unleashes a social evolutionary force, and it's all pretty inevitable. It doesn't reflect our nature. It means that it is inevitable that the things that can prevail in a war of all against all are going to be able to shape a lot of how things go, but always countered by trying to make the best of how to get human needs met, because that's what we as creatures want. And democracy got created as one of the really breakthrough innovations, in a sense. Just looking at the American Constitution, I mean, it wasn't like it was built out of nothing, but if you think of it in the context of how has power been dealt with in civilized societies up until this point, and you look at the Constitution and add to it the Bill of Rights, which are supposed to be the rules about how power gets handed out and how it can be used, and the other is spelling out some ways in which it can't be used. That was one of the great inventions, and I don't really know how much somebody might write a meaningful history that's in terms of, like, since the rise of democracy, the battle between democracy and whatever fascism I'm calling it, but it could be authoritarianism, or I mean, I don't know exactly what all I'm talking about, but I think there are a variety of different kinds of regime that deserve to have a name given that captures the essence of all of them. So that, for example, the regime of the slave power and the regime of the Nazis, I think, have certain important elements in common. There was a murderousness in the Nazis that was not present in I don't think, in the slave power, but there was enough destructiveness that our nation got terribly, terribly damaged. So those are the two of the times of the particular players on the civilized power struggle field took over the slave power and then Nazi Germany. And then the third place is what's happened in America over the past 30 couple years, since the rise of Limbaugh and Gingrich has been coming on. And at a certain point, it reached that threshold that where you say, can this be described as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse? And it gets to be truer and truer, and eventually we have gotten with the Republican Party of this era to the point where it is fundamentally true. And it is, in fact, the means by which I came to get it, that there is something that can work in the human world that deserves to be called a force of evil. I hadn't really seen evil that way until I started looking into this coherent force that the Republican Party was becoming. More and more, that was more and more consistently doing more and more, so that everything it said and did was sort of pushing in the wrong direction, making things worse. I don't know I don't know when we reach the point when that becomes true, but I felt that I saw it in 2004, that it was true. And then I spent a lot of years trying to understand, well, what is it that one sees? And I think what you can see is that there are forces moving through the human world through the generations. Forces of wholeness and forces of brokenness that are battling each other over which way the world's going to go, in the direction of, more brokenness, where people are, and the rest of life are suffering more and being fulfilled less, and all that kind of thing. So it does really kind of map. Brokenness is really a way of increasing the negative experience or decreasing the positive experience for creatures for whom there is a better and a worse dimension that they put on an experience. I mean, they prefer getting petted to being tortured. They do, and out of that there does emerge a kind of reality. People in the current secular worldview have always felt that value somehow doesn't exist in reality, but they've defined reality way too narrowly. Yeah, good and evil are there because there are realities that correspond to better and worse experience. I won't go further than that right now. And democracy. I mean, but if the American people were to have a landslide election, which is what I'm looking for, I want a big blowout, not just winning. I want to blow them out 2-1, which would be the biggest ever. Why? I want them to be driven into oblivion. I don't want us to have to keep on fighting this same battle every year. I don't want Trump and Trumpites to come back and come back and come back. And, we've got all this brokenness over the other side of tens of millions of people who believe ridiculous things in spite of mountains of evidence presented right in front of their eyes. We've got a lot to heal. We not only need to fight this battle, but we need to fight the larger battles that these are all part of. That there has been a division in the culture, almost like a kind of mitosis, where each becomes the sort of the photographic negative of the other. On the right, there came a force that was really good at grabbing power, and that has grown in power so much that it threatens American democracy now in a way that would have been unthinkable back previous decades. And on the left, we've got a secular worldview that doesn't have any particular conceptual space for anything that could be like a force of evil. So one of the things I'm proposing to do with people of a secular worldview who think there is nothing in reality that actually corresponds to a force of evil, if that's what you believe in, I really would like to invite you to consider what I lay out, that there is in fact a battle that emerges with any civilization creating species. It's an inevitable battle, and it's between two coherent forces, and they are opposite from each other in whether they're trying to make whether they're having the not to personify forces, whether they're having the impact of the kindness makes the world a little more whole, whereas the hatred and hostility make the world a little bit more broken, and billions of things of greater and lesser magnitude going on all the time. in the human world where um, you can see that these are coherent forces. And that's another thing that I try to demonstrate in more than one way. But at the very least, you can see that the Republican Party has reached a point where you really can't describe it accurately, except as, I mean, there's no way it's a mixture of the constructive and the destructive. You just can't find the constructive anymore. This isn't a period like, let's say, when Reagan was president, where you could occasionally get, him and Tip O'Neill work things out together. It isn't like that anymore. This party has been, on the right, has been so taken over by the force of fascism. Not that they're all that way, but they're all willing to yield to that way rather than jeopardize their political position. So, the people who don't like the idea of passing something that 2/3 of the House would vote for, because they are too fascistic to want to do that. They put out a call to vacate the speakership. And then the Republicans who would vote for the damn thing aren't willing to do what they need to do and go against this fascistic group, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of those guys. That is what the Republican Party has become. There are other elements in it. We know that. We know that. We know all the people, the 20% ultimately down from 40%, but still a big chunk of Republican primary voters voting for Nikki Haley. And I don't know how many to subtract out of all that for, Democrats crossing over as they could in some of these, but not all of them. It isn't the whole Republican Party, but I I fear that too many of those Republicans are so attached to their partisanship. It's so central to their identity in some way that they seek to find a way of justifying staying with that party. And I don't know how much I know what I'm talking about here. I mean, I know a couple of Republican couples here in the very Trumpy Shenandoah Valley that April and I really like, and they're really very sweet people, both of them. And with one of them in particular, I've had substantive exchanges about the political thing. We have a rule that we don't do that face to face, but there are some public venues. And my feeling is that there's a big problem, that there are a lot of good people who are not yet sufficiently clear-minded to repudiate the evil that their party has become. They don't see that the Republican Party is what it is now. That is what it is. And that is something that needs to be repudiated by good people. So democracy versus fascism, how do you win that battle with the good people on the other side that want to be aligned with the good? Because Biden versus Trump, the rule of law versus lawlessness, the Democratic Party standing for all of that versus the Republican Party standing for a rather fascistic political force. It is clear where the good person has to go. And I don't know. I don't know that gets accomplished. One of my interlocutors likes to always bring in something really negative about Biden and what the Democrats do, and I believe that it consistently has no basis in fact. Um, I'm not sure, but even if it did have some basis in fact, and it's not like Biden never does something that I find really regrettable, but it is so clear that for an American patriot like this fellow to dwell on that when his party is completely in the pocket of a guy who's clearly threatening to overturn all of those fine virtues of America that he's patriotic about. Liberty and justice for all. I mean, he's a guy who would actually feel kind of thrilled to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, if he votes for any Republicans at this point, unless it's somebody like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, he's voting against liberty and justice for all. He's voting for fascism. That's what it is. You know, political parties can change. I mean, the Democratic Party used to be the party of the segregationists. So, if my parents' generation that loved FDR also had to watch him cater to the white supremacists who are senators and representatives from the former Confederacy in the U.S. Congress. I mean, FDR couldn't go to what was her name? That great singer Judith Anderson's concert at the Lincoln Memorial. I think Eleanor Roosevelt went, but FDR had to be more careful. Teddy Roosevelt once invited one of the premier black people of that era. I can't remember. Was it Booker T. Washington? Forgive me, I don't remember. But he invited. Frederick Turner must have been dead by then, but somebody of really tremendously high caliber to the White House, and a white man and a black man sat together in the White House and dined together, and he elicited a huge storm against the white race from the white racist part of the American political system. Well, political parties change because the heirs of that moved over to the Republican Party after LBJ passed the civil rights legislation. And the unintended consequence of that is that one of our two political parties could get taken over by a force of brokenness where white supremacy and corporate greed could make common cause to establish a fascistic regime. And besides white racism and plutocracy, you've got the Trump factor added into it because it didn't have to be in this present form. This whole ugliness that the form that fascism is taking in America right now has to do with the role of this particular fascistic leader. I mean, Donald Trump, he puts a unique stamp on everything. I mean, nobody ever behaves the way he does all the time. So his fascism, I mean, he's got so much into retribution. I mean, his malignant narcissism is not a small part of the course that he takes. First of all, the malignant narcissist is a guy who can't acknowledge that he's been defeated. I believe that that's a factor here. that there is a deep psychological issue here. Not just that he wants to hold on to power, like to protect himself. There's that, but I think also the admission. I'd like to congratulate Joe Biden for winning this presidential election, and I call upon all Americans, whatever the stuff that the losers always said up until Trump. I think that that whole realm of invalidating the election, well, it does serve a purpose for the fascist force. I mean, discrediting the electoral process, calling attention to the questionable nature of, as the Republicans did from Trump, mail-in voting, which is just, the usual garbage. But all these people live in this world of illusions and falsehoods. It is frightening to me, given my passionate devotion to the idea that we can know about what the truth is. And I feel like that's part of what makes me an American, that the guys up on Mount Rushmore would say, yeah, he's doing what an American should do because I believe in the truth. And so did they. The people who wrote the Constitution wanted us to have freedom of speech and freedom of the press. They didn't want some fascist leader coming in talking about the press as the enemy of the people. I just, this friend of mine doesn't like Trump. This Republican friend of mine doesn't like Trump. But neither do I hear him say, as an American patriot, I feel like I have to vote for for Biden this time to protect the American democracy and he was a pretty high up Navy guy for a whole career, that I took an oath again and again and again to protect and defend. That inescapably, I would like for him to realize that it was right to be, as he would say, to be taking an oath to protect those things. But the Republican Party has become a threat to those things. And that being true to his oath that he took as a high-ranking Navy officer now means recognizing that as that was to protect the good, today's Republican Party is a threat to the good. It is part of the force of evil. I don't think he actually has that much trouble thinking that fascism is an evil. I'd be interested in knowing, because he and I discuss sometimes what's going on in Ukraine, and we've had one substantive disagreement about, how boldly should Biden have armed the Ukrainians from the beginning. But he's the more hawkish of the two of us. I kind of appreciated Biden being a little bit hesitant to provoke what might become a nuclear confrontation. I'm a veteran of the Cold War myself in terms of my work and thought and the world that I lived in. But he thinks we should have given him a whole lot of more sophisticated weapons faster. And I just don't know. I just don't know. But when he talks about Putin, he and I are of one mind. I mean, we want that man to fail. We want the reaction of the West and the Ukrainians together to result in a catastrophe for this guy and his regime. So I think that he recognizes that. Well, I don't think it's just because Putin's an enemy of the United States. I don't think it's just sort of like our team versus his team. I think he's got a real moral repugnance about uh, what uh, what uh, what Putin, this human monster, has done to kidnap tens of thousands and kill tens of thousands, and show no regard for. I mean, it's been very ugly. He's definitely earned himself a place in ignominy, infamy, like fascists generally do. Hitler, the the fascist regime in Tokyo that did what they did in Nanjing in 1930. I mean, the ugliness is their want. So I think he shares an idea about the ugliness. Does he not see how ugly his party has become? He doesn't like Trump, but it's the Trump party. What is he supporting? Something that used to exist? I don't fully understand. It might be good to understand because I bet there are a lot of people like him. I mean, he is a good man. He's a decent man. He's a very sweet guy. My cat likes him, but I mean, he is a sweet guy, and I think he's a genuine patriot. And he's not stupid. He's reasonably, but somehow he doesn't repudiate what his party has become, and I don't understand why. But yes, democracy versus fascism is good versus evil. And if there's a way of bringing good people like him to recognize the evil of what their party has become and to support the side of democracy of which Joe Biden is uh, the, the one and only champion, because that's the way it is, um, you know, we ought to do what we can do to achieve that. Thank you.